Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to This is an IT Support Group. I'm joined again today by the wonderful Lewis Pope.
Howdy, good to be back again.
So Lewis is, if you haven't heard of him before, which I'm sure you have by now, he is head nerd at Enable, and we're going to be talking today not about security research like we normally do on these shared streams today, but we're actually going to be looking at some legislative changes that are going to be impacting MSPs across the world. So, Lewis, I guess I'll just start with what are those biggest legislative changes, and are they currently impacting MSPs in the UK, EU, US, all of them?
Yeah, it really is global, and it's MSPs and MSBs, but there's some special concerns for MSPs. MSPs have always kind of enjoyed I don't want to say the protection, but the ambiguity of, well, we're just taking care of your computer systems for you. We're not responsible for your business in certain ways. And now, just as the world has gone on, all parties involved have come to the conclusion and realization that outsourcing IT, however you decide to outsource IT, whether that is to consultants, MSPs, MSSPs, small boutique operations, or giant international outsourced IT support conglomerates, whatever it may be, whenever you're making those decisions to outsource, it's not absolving the businesses, nor is it absolving those service providers to be accountable and responsible. And all of the legislative actions, the rulemaking, and everything we're seeing is kind of just that part of society catching up with the reality of what IT support really means today. So that it's not just about making sure that the computers turn on and the printers print, as I always say, but it's about the resiliency of business operations that are dependent upon IT in ways that it never has before. Therefore, the concerns and the accountability and the responsibilities are much different. This is just codifying that realization now. And in the EU, that's happening with the NIS2 directive. And then by that, all of the individual implementations of what the NIS2 directive asks for you to do being implemented as laws in each EU member state. Then there's the UK. The more recent one is the Cyber Security and Resiliency Bill that just got sent to Parliament this month. So still opportunities for it to change, shape, and form and what's in it. And then there's once it's, in action, what are the rules around it going to look like? But it's pretty much set with what it's going to be. And then in the US, there's the CIA, Cyber Incident Reporting and Critical Infrastructure Act. There is the Securities and Exchange Commission. Whenever you start getting into individual regulated industries, there's like the SEC disclosure forms with the SEC 8K filings about you have X amount of time to report. You have X amount of time to make the initial report and then the detailed report. And all of these different things from all of these different places are starting to align more and more and more. They're less and less arbitrary controls being called for, and more, oh no, we realize and everybody agrees that these are baseline standard best practices that we should be mandating all businesses adhere to and apply.
Yeah. So I guess then, if we're looking at, I guess a lot of the conversation today is stemming from the UK's latest guidance, but how would you say that's kind of tied? We mentioned all these other, like the EU, NIS2. How are they all kind of linked in together, and how is the UK actually tied to that directive?
Yeah, so there's language that explicitly calls for to align with where appropriate, and there's always the wiggle room of phrases like where it's proportional and what's appropriate. But the language explicitly states for the UK is like align where appropriate with NIS2. Major political points aside, the simple realization of, yeah, we need to be in alignment with what these other trade regions are doing because we want to trade in those regions as well. So it's well, we need to be on the same page. So that kind of, however it's going to be implemented, the lesson and the takeaways kind of sunk in that yes, we all need to be on the same page.
Yeah.
They have the pretty much identical incident reporting timelines. So it's 24 hours for an initial report to whatever your cyber security fusion center is going to be. That's going to be that the one source for that state or member country, or in the UK, it'll be the NCSC, I believe, probably. I'm not quite sure on that. But and in the EU, it'll be ENISA and its sub organizations. But 24 hours, you got to make the initial something happen. Well, this is what's impacted. Then a 72-hour better handling of, okay, this is a better description of what's happened and everything. And then the 1 month follow-up, this is what's not in the UK cyber resiliency at the moment, but it can still be happened. Most of the other regions are saying that there's a third report deadline of within a month. We need a full detailed what happened, what your current state is, what the remediations you're putting in place are to prevent this from happening in the future. They all are really emphasizing supply chain, and that emphasization of supply chain has been a major thing that's threaded through all of them.
That's it, isn't it? It's unless you're in a very small kind of use case, most MSPs need to comply with directives in other countries, because if you've got cross-party countries and clients that you're working with that are in different regions, you're going to have problems if you're not following those standards and those directives, because you could find yourself in a bit of legislative trouble.
Yeah, it could be legislative or contract loss opportunities. That say the days of going in and saying this is how we do it, and we're not going to talk about how we do it, and we're not going to reveal what our processes and methods are going to be. Those kinds of days are over. It's not you have to reveal your secret sauce for everything, but you have to be much more comfortable now with the prospect of I am going to have to answer to other parties about what I am doing, because my clients need to be able to do that so that they can get their contracts or preserve their contracts and their business relations. And then also you as an MSP, because of these regulations, it's going to be incumbent upon you to play ball, really.
Yeah, and I guess that's why we're also seeing those kind of similar regulatory themes appearing in the US, right?
Yeah. And it's here in the US, the timeline reporting, each individual, we have FINRA, we have things for the SEC for anybody that's a publicly traded company, but then we also have the smaller regulatory actions. But even with those smaller ones, even down at the state levels, even those state levels, you have to kind of account for scale. Whenever we're talking about an EU member state, we're basically talking about the equivalent of half of a US state sometimes. But it is they're all starting to align. They're all starting to, the EU's, I believe the NIS2 implementation, it's like only half of the member states have implemented NIS2 legislative language and law so far. In the US, it's kind of the same way, even though we have some federal guidelines and some executive orders and some other things dictating. All of the US states are not on the same page. They do not have all of these things implemented. One of our major kind of our legislative, I don't want to say it's a cliff, but it's legislative. Whenever there are complications with legislative processes, things that are important can fall off of cliffs. The U.S. has a safe harbor, or a not necessarily safe harbor. There is the the protections you receive for sharing threat intelligence information. Now, if you're sharing threat intelligence information in a formalized way among security researchers, the industry you're in, other things, you receive some protections for that. It's like, okay, no, you're doing a service, you're doing a public good here. So you don't have to worry about certain types of risk and liability exposure whenever you do that. But one of our main pieces of our rulemaking here that makes that possible was going to expire earlier this year. It got continued, but it's only being continued until January. And then we got what's going to happen in January? Is it going to fall off again or not? So the legislative scape it's always in movement. It's hard to keep up with it, but yeah, it's at the point where you have to be able to keep up to it, especially if you're going to be operate multinational, or if, and this is kind of you always kind of try to find what's my at least common denominator. And a lot of it is kind of panning out for the MSPs of, you know what, if you're more than 25 employees, that's probably the point at which you have to really start considering and looking at these, because that's what starts qualifying you. In the EU, you're a micro business at a certain size. And if you're a micro business, you don't have to worry about the NIS2 stuff, unless, of course, you are the exclusive provider of a service. Then you might be under purview.
Yeah.
But for most small businesses, it's about the 50-person mark, give or take. And that's where, oh, no, guess what? You're within scope. And MSPs, unfortunately, even though you can try to look at that as a qualifier for should I have to be concerned about this or not, there's other language where it says, oh, yeah, you are a managed service provider. You are providing these services. If you are providing this to a client that is in scope, then you're also in scope.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking a little bit about this in our last stream when we were talking about actually starting an MSP. And I guess the view of like micro businesses and probably larger MSPs as well is, can I actually get away from that? Is this one more thing that I need to now comply with, or do I not have to? So what does it really mean in practical terms for any MSP owners listening?
Right. And it's where are you on your journey? If you're just starting out and you're an entrepreneurial spirit and you want to start going and it's going to be you and a buddy, you don't have to worry about it too much at the moment. But if you're an established MSP, it absolutely has to be on the radar. Somebody within your organization needs to have their finger on it, or you need to hire in that expertise externally from consultancy or something else. Because there can be things on the horizon that if you're not aware of it, like, if a lobbying group is currently writing rules that's going to go to your state legislature and they're soliciting feedback, well, you should probably be a part of that feedback, because it's going to be regulating you in another 2 or 3 years. So it's there's a certain part of not being passive about it and just say, well, it's going to happen and I'll just have to deal with it. Involvement, become involved with it. If you are a professional, you are a member of an industry that is going to be regulated. We have organizations here in the States that are specifically for that effort. So I encourage you to go out and, join those or look into them. And there are those types of groups elsewhere as well that are, facilitating and gathering feedback to help, provide feedback into the loop. But in the larger sense of, you can't dodge this. Yeah, it's going to affect you in some way, shape, or form, even if you're not going to be responsible, even if you're not in purview of it, because your clients and their legal teams, your prospects are going to look at the laws and regulations and say, hey, it says that we should do these things. You're not going to be able to roll in and say, well, yeah, no, but we're so small that doesn't matter for us. It's like, yeah, but it matters for us, and we need you to be on board with what we're doing. So no, thank you. We'll go find somebody else
That's the thing, isn't it? It benefits everyone in the situation, both you and your clients, because if you're compliant with all the regulations needed, especially when you're serving and you've got maybe an active cyber insurance policy, that's one of the things that they're going to be looking at is, did you actually make those basic steps to protect the information of the clients?
Right. And this is Yeah, and this is changing, and I am not a lawyer, but this is also changing what the perception of what reasonable is. What is due care and due diligence? What would a reasonable professional in this situation have done? And that plays into also safe harbor laws. Safe harbor laws, this is always one of those. There's no choice. You got to go read your local ones and the ones that you are subject to. But safe harbor laws in general around this provide protection for an MSP if you do best practices. If you do best practices, which in the changing world that we are in is following an established and recognized framework for how you are configuring, set up an environment and delivering your services. If you're doing that, you have a defense against something going wrong underneath safe harbor. However, again, not a lawyer, but if you start making those, we're not going to do this because of money, not because of a proper risk evaluation, you're starting to chip away at what protections you might have underneath safe harbor. So these things all tie together. There's the legislation and the rulemaking that's saying you should do these things. And then there's other legislative and rulemaking that says, if you do these things, you are offered protection. And that's something a lot of MSPs of all sizes need to start grappling with and understanding better, because there's nothing you can do that is ever going to keep you 100% out of civil litigation if it ever happens, but you want your I's dotted, your T's crossed.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? There's like a certain element of wanting to be exempt from a potential situation, because obviously for business owners it's a headache. They want to spend those hours working on their clients' projects or service desk delivery, whatever it might be. It's going to take that time away. But equally, how much it would be much less of a headache if that stuff is implemented before it becomes mandatory or enforced, where you then have to do it in a rush. So
Right.
what would you kind of suggest as that balance and staying up to date with things and slowly implementing them before they become an even bigger headache?
I think it is, first is just, you've got to get a handle on what does actually apply to you. That is if you're resourceful enough and you're confident enough and you've got the time, you can absolutely go just read source documentation and find out what is applicable to you. But there will always be those edge cases of where, okay, something isn't quite plain language. There might be some clauses in or something that you don't understand. That's where do I go to legal counsel at that point? So for NIS2, that was October 18th, 2024. That was whenever it was supposed to be on the books, implemented, and everybody should be working towards implementing it. They're still behind on that. The UK, their cyber resiliency bill has been put in Parliament. It's still being worked through. It might change. It might stay what it is, but that's going to be a late 2026 item. In the US, the CIRCIA, even though that's not applicable to everybody, that's going to be, enforcement is early 2026. The CMMC requirements in the US, just previous in this month, November the 10th, I believe was, at this point, CMMC requirement language is in federal contracts now, or bids for federal contracts, and you have to be in phase one implementation of whatever your CMMC program is going to be. All that said, there's the should I, when should I, and the answer is now, start now, because you're going to find out about something that's absolutely going to be a sledgehammer coming down on your business, and you can dodge it, or you can account for it and prepare for it, or you're going to be uncovering opportunities that you didn't have because you can make small tweaks, change your sales and marketing language, and start offering new expanded scope of services to new certain industries or verticals that you had avoided before. But you know what? Hey, this all lines up and we are doing that anyway. Let's take it on. Or you'll find out that, yeah, we really are so small that we are out of scope of this and we don't want to ever become in scope of this. So let us use that to update our ideal client profile. So we're not wasting time and energy going after opportunities that we're not going to be able to support long term, that we're only going to be able to realistically keep for a year or two before we potentially have to back out or offer them some migration options because we can't continue to service them anymore. Because, I don't want to say don't take the contracts and the opportunities whenever they come, but if you've got to back out in a year, is that a good return for you or not? Most of the time it's not.
No, so I guess on that, when you do implement these things, and we're talking, when I say things, I mean, the legislation changes, NIS2, the standards that you have to follow depending on the country you're in. I'm sure we've got watchers that are not just in the US, we've got UK, maybe some EU as well, and other countries. So when we implement these things, will we feel any impact within the MSP operations? And if so, what would be impacted first? Would it be our security controlling, our documentation, maybe even the supply chain that we use for software and hardware, or reporting obligations, as we've mentioned already? What would be first, and how can they kind of address those things?
I think the first operational thing to confront, because there's so many follow on things that you'll have to adjust for. What you answer this first question is, can we honor or can we hit the reporting windows? Just answering that, ask and answer that first question of, if an event occurs, can we, what are our processes going to be for us to meet those reporting windows? And most of the times you're going to come out with we're not going to hit that. There's no way. We're going to be on day 2 still trying to understand the full scope of this, and nobody's going to have the bravery to go ahead and pull the lever of, we got to report this. You need to go ahead, and I think that's one of the first things you need to look at is, what are our pending reporting requirements, and can we do those? Because there's so much operational, technical controls, administrative controls that go into that if you say, no, we can't, and you have to start working back through how can we? That's going to be a lot of operational changes. That's going to be maybe new people hired. That may be a new platform you're having to use. It might be, getting on your teams and instituting a cultural change of, no, sorry, this stuff has to be documented. We need an auditable paper trail that these things were done. So yes, I do need you to, monitor on these endpoints whether something is enabled or not, and I need you to be able to produce that as a report for me. Those kinds of the operational changes that, especially for the MSPs that are more focused on the operational uptime challenge of just, my clients have me because they want things to work and they don't want downtime. You got to get past just that as a focus.
Yeah. So I guess in that case, what kind of changes would you say should be prioritized right now to maybe avoid that future disruption? There might be a case where you have to suddenly tell a client, look, we need to pull this setup we've got because it's not compliant. We need to pull down service, and actually we're going to affect SLA because we're now having to pull services down because we're not compliant, and kind of maybe prevent some of those future headaches.
Oh yeah, those are always the business must change how it operates because of this, and those are always big challenges, not only for an MSP and an SMB, but IT, internal IT as well. Whenever you have to roll up to the business decision makers, to the CISO, to the business owner, to the board, and say, guess what? I'm not just trying to convince you that you need to spend $80,000 more on cybersecurity this year. I'm telling you that you have to change the fundamental way that certain parts of the business operates. now you're getting into, you're not talking about $80,000 more for you. You're talking about $2 million, $3 million, $4 million worth of work that has to be done in the business through consultancy, changing of things, new functionality, new hires, all the things that go into it. So kind of making that realization of, how big of a mountain are you up against there? And there are ways of having those conversations. There are ways of positioning that so that it's not about trying to sell cybersecurity. It's about trying to get the business as a whole to be responsible and accountable for their business risks. And the NIS2 and the NIST cybersecurity framework in the US with its new govern function, they both speak directly to that board level, to that, this is if you are that IT person trying to have these conversations, familiarize yourself with those requirements inside of NIS2 and in this cybersecurity framework around governance, because they're clearly laying it out as this is a business and board decision. This is not an IT department decision. And then in the NIS2, it's got teeth. If you're a board member, if you're serving on a board and your decisions are considered negligent around cybersecurity, there's provisions in there for you to not serve on a board in the EU for a company anymore for an amount of time. And
I think this is going to be like some of the anxiety around, especially MSP workers or any kind of service providers for any business that are supplying IT or cybersecurity or any kind of services along those lines. They can offer and they can say, we strongly recommend, and it's even legally obliging to be doing the things that I'm telling you to do now. But if their clients turn around and say, sorry, we haven't got the budget for that, or something along those lines at that board level, this is normally the brick wall that a lot of people tend to hit when they're trying to communicate with their clients about it. Is there anything that you would kind of say, as you were just kind of mentioning at that board level, this is where it needs to be addressed in plain language, like that you will not be compliant with the law if you do not do these basic adjustments? How would you kind of say to MSPs or anyone in that industry, this is how we communicate it, and kind of look at the contract and maybe tighten it up a bit more so they're not going to be liable for those errors?
It's I'm borrowing something my sister always says: if it's not written down, it didn't happen. She's a medical, so it's documentation, hearsay and whatnot. That does not matter. I say apply that the same thing here. It goes in writing. These are business decisions that are being made, and for your own protection as a MSP, as a business, you want it in writing why your clients are making the decisions that they're making around the delivery of the services you're providing. Not only is it to, one is a CYA for yourself, but also it's psychological warfare. You're kind of, you're playing the game with them of, look, this is this important. I'm not going to be the one holding the bag on this. Your name is going to be what's signed here saying that you made the decision not to implement these things, not to do these things. Personalities clash. There's always the soft skills that are necessary for having those types of conversations. But it's a necessary headspace to be able to get yourself into as an MSP or even as internal IT, that these are business decisions. They need to be documented. And I'm not the person that is accountable or responsible for making those decisions and putting it on those individuals. Now, again, soft skills, but you also might be this might be a disqualifier for opportunities and relationships as well. I've always been a very big, one of the lessons I always want MSPs to learn very early and very quick is, if a client says we're not going to do something, make sure they're not saying that under the assumption of, well, you're just going to fix it for me later. You're going to be the one that's going to have to take care of it anyway later for me. So I'm not going to worry about it. Because, no, I'm not going to pay you for your SIM service and your XDR service. But whenever I get hit with ransomware, I'm going to be very upset that you're charging me an hourly rate to come in here and try to resolve this for me. They are trying to transfer their risk or the responsibility of the liability and everything else that goes with the risk. They're trying to offset their exposure by using you. And they're doing it by telling you that I'm going to pay you less money and be a bigger liability and risk for you. That is not good business.
No, and I think that's something that is pretty common, unfortunately, is that there's this assumption that because you're a contracted client of a service provider that they're going to sort everything out for you, even if you don't agree to specific services, trying to prevent those things from actually happening in the first place. I guess we could just come back for a minute. There's existing frameworks on, you've got CIS, ISO 27001, the NIST CSF. Are those really enough to align with new expectations? Because a common thing that is said in the industry is if you're complying with usually a very high standard, like an ISO 27000 framework, normally all these legislative stuff coming in are going to be below those kind of higher expectations of that. I guess there's always a risk that there might be one or two things that are not actually in the standard, and then you could be kind of
right
in the deep water.
Yeah, and it's for the most part, the standards and the frameworks are wonderful for the operational side of things, of how we should implement things, the things we should be doing, the things we should be concerned about and monitoring. But they're never going to speak to your reporting obligations of, you're operating in this, in this region, therefore you must. Now, you're going to define that within like the scope of something like ISO 27001. You're going to definitely define that, but it doesn't tell you what that is. You still have to go figure out what your obligations are. Same with most other standards and frameworks is they'll tell you should do it, but you've still got to figure out the execution and all of your, whatever you're accountable for and your legal requirements. But even with that, I don't think that such a, there is always there's two things actually, or three things. There is I don't want to start implementing things to one framework and then a couple of months later, there's another framework that I've got to implement to. 98% of the time, 99% of the time, it's not redoing work. It's mapping. It's changing the description of something. It's categorizing what you're doing underneath a access control mapping table rather than a privileged access management set of controls in another table. Still the same work, still the same thing. You're doing the same, getting the same results. They're just qualifying and calling it and putting it under different things. That's why if you're saying, well, I just want to do the best I can across the board so that whatever may come up, I'm prepared for it. There's meta frameworks like the secure controls framework, which is a meta framework of frameworks. And it's just saying, this is all of the frameworks that are out there. They're all mapped together. And here's the commonality between all of them. That's absolutely a perfectly fine place to start. Especially for the fact of, for the most part, it means you don't have to redo any work as far as the operational implementation of it. It's just documentation and mapping it. And that can be a task. It is not a small feat. It's not something you're going to drop on your existing team either. I don't think it's not something you're just going to drop on them and say, this is now within your purview. You got to figure it out. So if you're like on the management side of things, it's somebody needs to be given the bandwidth and the resources to do it. They might be able to go back to their regular work later, but in that first stages of the research, the implementation, and doing it all, somebody, whoever's responsible for it, is going to need the resources and the bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, I mean, my next question on that was going to be, you're say you're the MSP owner and you've got the responsibility here. What steps should MSPs actually take today to start preparing their teams without completely overwhelming them with upcoming changes like this?
Right. So there's the honest accounting of what resources you have and what you can expect your teams to achieve. Technicians, engineers, we love black boxes. We love tinkering with things. We'll absolutely bang our heads against a brick wall until we figure something out. That is not a good business practice. That is not conducive to scalability, repeatability, and all of the other things you want in an MSP or in any type of IT program, support program. So I think that's a kind of just own that out the gate and make that realization, and then get into a little bit more of the, okay, what, do a quick scoping of the, well, what are we absolutely going to have to align to? What are we going to be forced to do? Figure that out first. And the easy example of that is like here in the States, you look at your client base. Are they manufacturers? Are they holding contracts with federal entities or with prime contractors for the federal government? Then you absolutely should be focused, like laser focused right now on CMMC specifically. But in the broader sense, it's, just focusing on okay, who are my clients? What are they under purview of? Are they going to be under purview of NIS2? Or are they going to be purview under the UK cyber resiliency? Are they going to be under purview of US? And just list it out. List out what is going to be required and check it off as a, yes, we're already doing this and it's not a concern. And then it's a gap analysis. It's all it is. It's a gap analysis, but instead of a technology gap analysis, it is a regulation gap analysis. And just work through it as that kind of an exercise. Don't worry about the legalese of it and the changing nature of it. It's just you have to start reading through it and checking off what you can and cannot do first.
So I guess we've kind of mentioned slightly earlier on in our stream about kind of this global harmonization that's going on. Could we see that in a bit more depth in the coming years? We're kind of seeing that most countries are following, and regions and states, they're all kind of following the same sort of legislation. They're all trying to kind of group together and similarize the wording of a lot of these, trying to simplify the situation for business owners, and so they actually know, set out what their responsibilities are, not just cross state but cross country. Do you think that's going to improve as time goes on, or do you think it could become more kind of a mess? I suppose
it's getting better over time. We're on NIS2, so that's to replace NIS1, and the Cyber Resiliency Act in the UK was to replace the original wording and language that was, again, aligned to NIS1. So globally, they're starting to sound more similar. They are. Who you report to is different, but they're still that you report. There's the different penalties, but they're still penalties. And they're all still carrying for better or worse, carrying those types of appropriate language of, what is appropriate for the risk profile, which does give you wiggle room as far as the legislative demand goes. But whenever you step to the next question of, well, what are they saying we should be following? They're all kind of universally saying, yes, go follow established frameworks. Do not don't just come up with something on your own and that's what you're doing. It's like, no, map it against, test it against what the established recognized frameworks are. And that's going to be like ISO 27001, 27002 for like the actual controls, and this CSF here in the US, the CIS controls for like the actual security controls on the endpoints, and the actual the CIS benchmarks for like actual configurations for certain things and environments. They're all going to be just kind of in that meshed up ball of, there are best practices out there, go follow the best practices.
Yeah, cool. So I guess we've been talking about the best practices, the implementations, and the changes that can need to be made more generally to businesses and their practices. Are there any kind of tools that are out there that would actually help MSPs kind of meet these evolving legislative requirements? And how can one person, especially if we're talking, these micro businesses, some of them might have to be compliant, and not all of them are going to be exempt from it. How can they, without the staff and the teaming, actually keep up to date with all of this stuff?
Right. And it's a challenge and an opportunity. And it is a wonderful opportunity for the MSPs that can figure out the how. And that does mean that there's going to be MSPs that do not figure out the how, and it's going to be this lost opportunities, a shrinking of opportunities, maybe some attrition of accounts over time. So there is you need to figure it out, but how do you figure it out? I think it's also tied to another trend that's in the compliance as a service, and more particular, the vCISO, or the fractional CISO as a service, because these are all the concerns, this legislative stuff and the pressures that are applying. These are all the concerns and the remit of a chief security information officer, or a chief security officer, depending on how they break up duties. But that's who your clients are supposed to have as their internal employee, or a board member that's responsible for making those kinds of decisions for the business. And most of your clients are not going to have that person in that role, so they're going to be seeking your help in doing that. That's where it's your opportunity to stand up as a vCISO, as a fractional CISO service, to fill those gaps for them. Now, that means, well, okay, I'm going to need somebody to run that vCISO program for me. That's the person that should be carrying that research burden weight for you as well, or that team should be the ones that are carrying that research burden for you, of keeping up with what legislation is happening. What are the changes? Oh, look, the phone number we're supposed to call to report an incident to the Fusion Center changed 3 weeks ago. That would be on that person, that team, to do that. And I'm always loath to say hire somebody, but this is one of those situations where you're not throwing a tool at it. This takes tools are going to help. Absolutely. You're going to need those tools. You're going to need those compliancy platforms that are going to help out with this. But it's going to take an individual that knows and understands this stuff to be able to execute on it for you. Do you skill yourself up to do that? Do you hire externally? Do you go find that new hire? Do you train up internally? Do you make it as a, guess what, guess what? We're opening up a new role. Everybody everybody do your pitch. Why do you think you're going to succeed at this? Tell me how you're going to operationalize and implement all of this stuff for us. And, that sounds wonderful. Guess what? You've got another 5 months to 6 months of learning and education you need to now go do, and we'll implement this program in a year, kind of thing. It's big, it's major, it's not a small thing. But you can't treat it as the challenge. You have to treat it as the opportunity.
Yeah, so I guess finally then, once we've hopefully established internally within the MSPs, these changes, and say that role has been fulfilled, and that's great. The MSP knows what's going on. They're kind of on top of everything. How should they really communicate that and those changes? We were talking about changes at the board level. directly to clients, because, as you know, especially if it's affecting pricing, because you're going to have to spend more hours on their business.
Mhm.
You're going to more billable hours very least. Maybe implementation of different tooling or software to support the MSP with keeping that client completely compliant with these new rules. Um, how should that be done?
It probably, I think it needs to be you don't come at it as an expansion of current services. Even though it is what you're doing, you don't come at it as I got something else to sell you. And you can't come at it as we're going to pay an external consultant and they're going to help us with our marketing. And we're going to build this monolithic marketing program that we're going to go out into the world with it. You can, but that's still not going to get rid of the fact of you're going to have to find a way to give the capable individuals on your teams the time and the bandwidth to spend having I spent 5 hours on this, and no, I did not bill a single hour for this kind of preparatory work in the beginning. That if we want the opportunity, if we want to be able to have that opportunity, if we want the clients to move with us and to go along with all of these recommendations we're going to be making for alignment with these regulations, you need them to buy in. And that means, soft skills again shows up. You have to have enough conversations with them and talk with them enough to understand, are they already aware and know this, and they don't need the motivation for we need to talk about it, versus someone else where, your first, half of your efforts is just getting them motivated enough to talk about it in the first place. And you have to, can we afford that? Can we not afford that? Or, are the clients that we're going to have to spend all of that time convincing them that they need to have this conversation worth it? If it's your smaller clients, maybe not. If it's, somebody that represents 20% of your monthly revenue, absolutely. And then, just making that, well, are we going to start not, I don't want to say not caring, but it's okay, that client is not a good match for us anymore in the direction that we are going in. Be ready and prepared for that type of fall off.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, isn't it? You can kind of frame these changes as much as you can so that the clients kind of see them as maybe added value rather than extra cost to their business. Right. You can maybe prevent the changes as mandatory or advisory, or maybe even part of like a long-term roadmap, maybe.
Yeah.
But if even at that point, when you've done the best you can to kind of communicate, this is really essential stuff, and there's we don't want to go ahead with you if you do not want to implement this stuff into the business. I guess that only leaves you one option, which is to find a client that fits you better. And
yeah, it is not all money is good money. Sometimes clients cost you more than what they are worth. And that is a challenge, especially earlier in the MSP journey, when it's like, oh, hey, there's a new contract, let's take it. But yeah, there's a certain amount of, no matter how good you are at selling whatever it is you do, you need the person on the other end to want to buy in, to go along with it. And sometimes they simply are not. The business decision makers are not going to align with you until they have their, fire bad moment, and they learn because they get burned by something. But even then, it's like, do you want to be a part of that scenario? Because if they're not following your recommendations and then something happens because they didn't follow your recommendations, again, back to what I was saying earlier, did you get that on paper or not?
Brilliant stuff. Well, Lewis, we're just coming up on time, but if anyone has any questions, wants to carry on this conversation with you, how can they reach out?
Yep. As normal, you can find me out on LinkedIn. I'll be, the occasional post out there at the Security Pope. You can also find me out on Twitch every once in a while doing some coding. No VODs over there, but you might just catch me live every once in a great while doing some PowerShell or some Go programming for something, and usually around compliance. And then also just the Enable YouTube channel. There they are constantly putting out content materials there that are technical, product, business focused as well. So we try to make what we do available to the community, not silo it.
Brilliant. I will put that link to the YouTube channel in the description of the video. So if anyone wants to have a look, that would be great. Well, Lewis, it is always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us again. And I'm sure we'll see you very soon.
Okay. Pleasure as always, Ed.
Take care, everyone.